phased out high-yield 5-year large certificates of deposit as they look to cut costs and ease pressure on profit margins. Banks, including ICBC and the Agricultural Bank of China, now offering only shorter-term large-scale certificates of deposit ranging from 6 months to 3 years. These shorter-term products carrying interest rates of about 1.2 to 1.8%, lower than roughly 2% on the previous 5-year offerings. President Trump meeting with NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang to discuss U.S. export controls on the company's H200 AI chips. Huang was in Washington meeting with lawmakers, warning that patchwork state-by-state AI regulations could slow U.S. innovation. Taking a quick check, we're looking at NVIDIA shares down 1%. We're also tracking some of the Chinese chip plays in action in the Hong Kong and Chinese markets, and SMIC shares just a slight negative bias at 67.10. Now, Jensen expressing uncertainty about whether China would accept the H200 chips if the U.S. relaxes its restrictions on sales. Huang saying, quote, "We don't know, we have no clue." Here's more of what the NVIDIA CEO had to say.
We have to ensure national security. Remember, China makes plenty of chips, and their military has plenty of ample chips and bought Chinese chips to build whatever they need. We need to ensure America can continue to win the technology leadership position around the world.
So the focus very much on, we heard from various secretaries in the United States about Taiwan, about its role in the semiconductor space. We do know that Taiwan and the United States are currently continuing their trade negotiations. I believe it's the 5th round that is ongoing, and potentially a deal before the end of this year. Taiwan is working to cut down the trade tariffs from 20% to 15%, which would be similar to what is the current standing tariff imposed on South Korea and Japan. Now, as far as semiconductors are concerned, this is what Howard Lutnick had to say.
The fact is, this administration's goal is to bring semiconductor manufacturing to America, right? When we walked in the door, all there was the CHIPS Act, and that really was just a disaster. It wasn't working. So we reshuffled the deck. We changed the way we did anything. You remember TSMC announced a $100 billion increase in their build in Arizona, up to $165 billion. Micron invested more. Texas Instruments invested more. So we're up to like $300 billion in investment in America. I think when we do a deal with Taiwan, that's even going to be bigger. And of course, they're going to train American workers. The whole objective is to bring the supply chains to America, build semiconductors in America, build pharmaceuticals in America, train Americans to do it, and let's have that supply chain right here in America. That's the entire objective.
In terms of semiconductors, this is the crown jewel for Taiwan. And I'm speaking of TSMC, which has a $165 billion project to build out semiconductor manufacturing in the United States. Taiwan President Lai Ching-te speaking in a recorded address to the New York Times Dealbook Summit, talking specifically about semiconductors.
Taiwan's semiconductor industry plays a crucial role, especially as we enter the future AI era. But I want to emphasize with humility that Taiwan's semiconductor sector is a global asset. The industry functions as an ecosystem. President Trump wants the U.S. to become the world center for AI, and we are willing to assist in this. As I said earlier, we hope Taiwan-U.S. tariff negotiations will not only help reduce the U.S. trade deficit, but also deepen bilateral economic cooperation, further integrate Taiwan's industries with the American economic structure, and strengthen the Taiwan-U.S. relationship. This will contribute to global prosperity and development.
On Taiwan, we have President Donald Trump signing the Taiwan Assurance Implementation Act. Now, what it requires now is the State Department to regularly review and update guidelines when it comes to governing official U.S. interactions with Taiwan. And this review will be conducted no less than every 5 years. And following this review, a report will be submitted on the findings within 90 days. Of course, Taiwan cheering this fact, the Kuomintang, the opposition party, saying that they welcome welcome the U.S. law safeguarding Taiwan's core interest and continual development. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Taiwan saying that this is a major step towards U.S.-Taiwan relations. Now, also important to note is Japanese Prime Minister Takaichi appearing to be walking back some of the comments that she made just about a month ago when she was speaking to lawmakers. She was again responding to lawmaker questions and reinforcing Tokyo's position on the island, remaining unchanged, she says, as stated in the 1972 Japan-China joint communique, and there has been no change to this position. And what it says is the government of the People's Republic of China reiterating that Taiwan is an inalienable part of the territory of the People's Republic of China, and that the Japanese government, quote unquote, fully understands and respects this stand. Now, just about November the 7th, so about a month ago, Takaichi was asked in the legislature about circumstances surrounding Taiwan that would count as a survival-threatening situation, which would then prompt Japan in terms of enabling its self-defense military reaction. And with that, we have all of the tense back and forth between China and Japan and the economic barriers in terms of seafood exports now have been banned in China, as well as a cancellation of a number of flights between China and Japan. Now, this fallout is ongoing. The diplomatic spat between China and Japan has been material. Japanese hotels are now under pressure from this slump of Chinese tourists. We have now the travel and transport reporter Monica Petrelli joining us with more details on this. Monica.
Yeah, good morning, Emily. So the latest information is that hotel reservations have dropped about 57% in the later part of November compared to the earlier part. Of course, in the mid-November is when we saw China advising its citizens to not travel to Japan any further. Now, we also see flight cancellations continuing to rather trickle in at this point. In the immediate aftermath of that warning, we saw around 500,000 flights canceled. Since then, about another 120,000. Now, this, in terms of flights, well, Chinese state media putting this around 40%, up to 40% of all flights from China to Japan. Independent aviation analysts looking at this saying it's more like 25%. But really the ultimate purveyor of truth that I'm looking at least, will be the Japanese tourism statistics that will be out here in about 10 days. So I'll be watching that and we'll be bringing that to you. Of course, China, a key market for Japan. About 1 in 4 travelers to Japan this year has come from China. And a key thing to consider here, Emily, we talk about the joint communique that back in 1974. It did talk about normalizing relations, specifically in terms of trade, shipping, aviation, and fisheries. And it mentioned aviation, but not tourism per se. We know outbound travel from China back pre-1980s, virtually very, very small, definitely not the powerhouse that it is today. And we know that this, in fact, was one of the first levers that really China was able to use to show its displeasure over the Prime Minister from Japan's comments. It's back to you.
Monica, thank you very much for that. Monica Petrelli, and we're continuing to watch the economic fallout following the Takaichi comments, although just yesterday walking some of that back. Monica, thank you very much for that. Later in the show, China-EU ties fraught with tension, but that seems to be thawing now as French President Emmanuel Macron meets with Chinese President Xi Jinping. We'll take a closer look at China-EU ties with Alfred Schipke, director of NUS East Asian Institute. That'll happen later on in the show. The China Connection taking a quick break here. We'll be right back.
$100 million. No weapons. In broad daylight. The Louvre Heist, minute by minute, premieres 14th December on Discovery Channel.
Haven't changed your old box? Beyond Demand service is ending soon. No worries? Let us switch you to a new box. No contract, no installation fee, and you can win home appliances and more prizes.
Astro New Box is really easy to use. Press home and then select whatever you want to watch.
My kids love to watch movies. I will stream Disney Plus with them.
The new box has all these apps that are part of your package. Want to win? Switch now. Just give us a call.
Wi-Fi sangkut lah.
Wi-Fi sangkut-sangkut? Jom kasih kencang. Stream cerita hebat Didi and Friends. Wi-Fi kencang untuk pelbagai peranti. Percuma router edisi terhad Didi and Friends. Stream Didi and Friends story time tak sangkut-sangkut. Dapatkan Astro Fiber sekarang.
The C-suite executives reshaping how you view sports. We'll hear from NFL executives Christine Dorfler and Renee Anderson on the league's transformational plans for the next 5 years.
I think that we will be serving fans across the globe in a way that we never imagined.
Plus, Versant Sports President Matt Hong's game plan.
We have a wide variety of top-tier programming that crosses almost every geography and every demo that we could possibly want.
This is CNBC Sport on the record.
Abu Dhabi Finance Week returns in early December, and CNBC has every angle covered. I'll be live in Abu Dhabi, the self-named capital of capital. This year's theme is Engineering the Capital Network, and I'll be bringing you full coverage of all the events and key players. Coverage starts Monday, 8th December on TV and CNBC.com, or listen anytime via the CNBC app.
Welcome back. Treasury yields are pulling back after a big miss in the U.S. private ADP payrolls report, with bets growing for the Fed to cut rates next week. The data showed a decline of 32,000 jobs last month, missing expectations for a gain of 10,000. It was the biggest decline in more than 2.5 years, driven by job losses at small businesses. Economists warn that data often diverges from official Labor Department numbers and may overstate weakness. Services activity held steady and manufacturing output was flat, with tariffs pushing import prices higher. Economists say the ADP reading could influence a divided Fed as policymakers meet next week without November's official jobs report. Here's what U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick had to say about that dismal jobs report.
Remember, you had the Democratic shutdown, right? And what do you think happens to small business? The people who do business with the U.S. government, they know they're not getting paid, so they sort of slow down their projects. So you saw a little bit even of construction of small business down. So the Democratic shutdown hurt the numbers. And then remember, as you deport people, that's going to suppress private job numbers of small businesses. But they'll rebalance and they'll regrow. So I think this is just a near-term event. And you'll see as the numbers come through over the next couple of months, you'll see that all pass. And next year, the numbers are going to be fantastic. I think because the jobs of building in America, you know, as Donald Trump talks about, President Trump talks about the huge construction projects coming to America, I think you're going to see GDP next year superb, over 4%.
U.S. stocks rallied on hopes for lower borrowing costs. The Dow, S&P, and NASDAQ posting their 7th positive session in 8 and are on track for a second week of gains. The 3 major indices are up so far in December, but remember, we are coming off a tumultuous November. Valuations have been a big concern for investors, but that may not have dampened risk appetite for some investors. Let's take a look at how semiconductor-linked ETFs performed for the month of November. Direction's daily semiconductor bull 3x ETF saw a sharp surge earlier in the month, boosted by NVIDIA's blockbuster earnings before pulling back later on. Its bearish counterpart moved in the opposite direction, gaining ground as the broader market retreated. And despite swings, Direction's semi-bull 3x ETF still pulled in more than $1 billion in inflows for the month. Douglas Yonis is CEO of Direction and joins me around the set here for a chat on the markets. And of course, welcome to Hong Kong, Douglas.
Yeah, it's great to be back. We're having a great time talking to a lot of investors in the region. You know, there's a lot to talk about as we've seen all morning. There's global news that are impacting the semiconductor industry because we're talking a little bit about the triple levered semiconductor ETF. We're talking about what's going on in interest rates, how that'll impact globally, GDP. There's a lot.
There is certainly a lot, and we're watching the market. So I first want to get your take on, this 3-year bull run that we've seen in U.S. markets as you guys are managing $58 billion assets under management, the largest issuer of single stock leveraged and inverse ETFs. How does it play out in your space?
Yeah, that's right. So for anyone who's not familiar with the direction lineup of ETFs, as you mentioned, we're a U.S.-based asset manager, but we do have individuals working all around the world, including here in Hong Kong. We have a nice office. And, you know, investors globally that trade, that are focused on short-term moves in the market, that's really where we spend our time. We work with the trading community and the folks that want to take advantage of short-term movement in the overall markets. And what we've seen really is a lot of volatility. And we know that it's coming from a number of different reasons. And the headline news are real, and the headlines are moving the markets probably more than we've ever seen. In the last year or two, I think we've had more 1% moves in any single day than we've seen for maybe the previous decade all the way back. And so for traders, they're looking to take advantage of those opportunities. The market likes to overprice, and then it likes to oversell. And so for short-term traders that want to trade momentum, direction lineup of ETFs is where we focus.
Talk to us a little bit about those trends that you're seeing, of course. So first and foremost, we know that Jensen Huang was with Donald Trump, where they are talking about export controls. AI has been, you know, constant through the year. How are you guys playing the AI trade?
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about that, because I think that's a perfect example. When we look at NVIDIA, as we started to trend into the most recent round of earnings, right, there was a lot of concern, but also forecasted up or down. So if you were a bull heading into NVIDIA, guess what? We offer a 2x levered bull ETF that'll give you twice the daily performance to the positive, to the bull side for NVIDIA. We also offer a bear fund. So if you're an investor who's thinking, I'm concerned about NVIDIA, so there's really two ways to play it. What we're seeing, though, generally, not just with NVIDIA had record earnings, right? It took a little while for the market to, I think, digest that. We're seeing it across all semiconductors. As you pointed on the screen, right? It was a really turbulent month for November. Swing traders loved it, right? Direction lineup of traders. They loved it because they could trade to the upside, then quickly shift to the bear side. But for a lot of investors, we were concerned. What's happening here? But if you look at the math and you look at the numbers, over 80% of the S&P 500 companies that reported the last round of earnings beat their earnings in a record format, right? So we're still seeing the growth. We're seeing it play out in earnings. We're seeing it play out in the space. And so while there's always these short-term concerns around CapEx and some of the other budgeting that's happening around AI, NVIDIA chip makers, the reality is the long-term trend is still our friend. And so we do believe that going into 2026, we're looking at probably another really strong year.
So I have to ask you this. When we have these concerns about valuations, you have the bull and the bear scenario ready for investors to take advantage of. If people are worried about a bubble bursting, which way do you go?
Well, I think that's exactly it. So we know that the trend is our friend, as I mentioned, and that earnings are there. So the valuations, while high, continue to justify through the fact that these companies are making a lot of money, more than they ever have. However, what we do realize is because those valuations are so high, and yes, we do expect that to continue over the long term, over the short term, any little news in the market, any little hiccup is going to move all of the Mag 7, right? Each one of those Mag 7, whether it's earnings, whether it's a CEO comment, whether it's a presidential comment, we know that we're going to see those short-term moves, and those moves can be sometimes as large as 3, 4, 5, 10%. And so that gives traders an opportunity to say, well, I'm concerned about some small piece of news, I can trade the bear. But I recognize that the trend is tending to move upwards. So when that news clears out and the market starts to recover, they can trade the bull.
And what about the inverse product, the leveraged and non-leveraged products?
Yeah, that's right. So we do focus on both. So we offer the Titan series. The Titan series offers 2x leverage to the bull and also 2x to the bear. And then we offer a lot of single stock ETFs like NVIDIA, Meta, Google, right? Taiwan Semi, because I know we've been talking about Taiwan Semi this morning. There's been a lot of news. Pretty much all the major Mag 7 securities, as well as semiconductor stocks. We offer that because people sometimes want to hedge their position. If you've been holding one of these individual stocks for a very long time and you're looking at the news and saying, I'm a little concerned. I don't want to sell my position, maybe for tax purposes, maybe for some long-term consideration, but I just want to take a little money off the table. What can I do? You can buy a negative 1x inverse ETF to hedge the position and take a little bit of money off the table. table, and that's something that we've started to see out of a lot of traders globally.
So this is really about short-term trading as well for retail as well as institutional investors. What are you guys doing about educating some of your investors that are interested in these products to protect them, that they may not really understand the product?
That's right. So if you're trading leverage ETFs or you haven't traded and you're thinking about it because they're a daily reset, it can be complicated. You want to make sure you know what you're doing. We offer free resources. We have a wonderful university you can take, direction.com. Just come to our website. It'll take you through and teach you exactly how it goes. What if you're not a short-term trader? What if you're thinking the long term? What's available? So one of the more popular products we have right now is the NASDAQ 100, but equal weight, not market cap weighted. And this has become a big news story because we're starting to see the cycle change, meaning historically market cap weighted meant the top 3 companies in the NASDAQ 100 were almost the entirety of the NASDAQ 100. You weren't really getting a diversified product. Well, that's fine if the biggest companies are driving the market like we saw over the last 5 to 8 years. However, that's starting to change. We're seeing slightly smaller companies, mid-cap companies really drive overall growth. They're beating out their larger competitors. Now might be the time for an equal weight product. So we're seeing that cycle reverse, and QQQE is our ETF in that for long-term investors that are just thinking, hey, I think maybe some other parts of the market are due their turn when it comes to earnings growth.
Now, I want to talk more about these single stock ETFs and the different products that you do offer, but I also want to know why you're here in Hong Kong, because we're looking at trading activity in the Hong Kong market. Will you be listing or cross-listing any of your products here?
Yeah, and that's exactly one of the reasons. So we have a team here that focuses on education, on working with a lot of the asset managers in the region. We know a lot of Asia-based investors like to utilize the direction lineup of ETFs. That being said, if you've been tracking the Hong Kong market, you know this. The HKEX and the team there have really been leaning forward in terms of educating local investors about how you can use ETFs instead of things like warrants, which can be very expensive, instead of things like futures, which can be very expensive. And so we're starting to see that migration where investors are saying, are ETFs right for me? Well, that's a perfect time for Direction to step in because we have a lot of education and we have a lot of ETFs for traders that make a lot of sense if you've been trading warrants, but you're realizing that there's a lot to offer through the HKEX with individual stocks or ETFs. That's where we want to step in. So yes, well, part of the things that we're working on right now is how do we bring the Direction lineup of ETFs, not just to online brokers, but here in Hong Kong for somebody to be able to trade them on the HKEX.
About a quarter of your assets under management come from Asia. Will you be looking to branch out into any other markets?
Yeah, you're exactly right. So Hong Kong's a very large market for us. We're excited about that. We continue to invest here. We just went to a newer office space because we're expanding. So obviously Hong Kong, major market. We also see investors in Korea are very active. They like to trade the markets. They like to trade the headlines. So they utilize Direction lineup of ETFs. Similar in Japan, similar across really almost every Asia country. And what's been interesting is the regulators everywhere are focused on education. We love that. And so we lean in on education, and the more that the regulators and the exchanges and investors want to learn, that's perfect. That's direction weather for us. And so we're trying to build as much local education as we can, whether it be through language services, so that it's not just in English. We are thinking about local markets, and so we're expanding. We're expanding in Asia Pac, and we love it here.
Douglas, that's great. We hope you will come and visit us when you have some announcements to make for the Hong Kong market and making your expansion here in Hong Kong and Asia.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. We've been speaking with Douglas Yones from Direction. As we tail off into a break, taking a quick check on gold prices. The yellow metal is traded like this. At 4,206, silver at 58.59, silver hovering at record highs, and we are checking those prices.
call if you want to meet somebody.
He's a matchmaker. Do you want a drink? Hey, buddy.
Hey, John. I missed you. You can do better than me.
My instincts are usually right. Not gonna marry him, are you?
Why not?
What are you thinking about?
I don't think I'm very good at my job anymore. We promised them love, but the math doesn't add up.
Materialists. Rent and stream on demand at Cody Channel 480.
Biggest names in business.
It was a really good quarter.
When it matters most.
This growth was driven by transactions.
Before they talk to Wall Street, they talk to John Ford and Morgan Brennan. Closing Bell Overtime. Weekdays on CNBC.
Jimmy has Sydney Sweeney with What's Behind Me.
Yes!
I catched it! Yes! And Tom Pelfrey.
There you go. That's right.
Plus Christmas sweaters and holiday decor at the White House.
How about a big advent calendar, but behind each door is the name from the Epstein list?
This weekend.
Every new vehicle we put out, we're improving fuel economy and emissions.
We need a balanced and a fair energy transition for everyone.
The total value chain of battery will be very important.
Improve our operational efficiencies and reduce the consumption of natural resources.
Environmental sustainability is a must, and energy security is another pillar.
Renewable energy is cheaper than electricity made from fossil energy in 90% of the world already today.
Fostering sustainability on CNBC.
I was a refugee from Cuba. My family left with nothing, really. I was ambitious. My first job was in Mexico City as a sales representative, selling to mom-and-pop stores. I had no idea, no clue that 24 years later I would be the CEO of the company. Success is about having the support and trust of people. Success is also about will, sheer will, and never losing that ambition. I wanted to do great things in this country.
You're looking at a snapshot of the market action across Asia. The lead from Wall Street was positive, but as you can see, it is very mixed playing out here. The Nikkei 225 is the leader on the board, up 1.5%. The Kospi down 1.1% at 39.90, and the Straits Times off fractional 0.1%. Fresh comments from Japan's chief cabinet secretary saying that the recent yen moves are, quote, somewhat rapid, one-sided. We're tracking the JPY 155.36. Let's move over to the Greater China markets. We're seeing the Hong Kong market trade weaker on the session, just with a slight negative bias. Let's just call this fractional losses. The Shanghai Composite off 0.25%, in Shenzhen down 0.2%. We are watching China as French President Emmanuel Macron now in Beijing on his fourth state visit to China at the invitation of Chinese President Xi Jinping. During this three-day visit, Macron is scheduled to hold bilateral talks with Xi, focusing in on trade and diplomatic ties. The French president is also expected to enlist Beijing's help in reassuring, or I should say pressuring, Russia towards a ceasefire with Ukraine. French Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot also in China, meeting with his Chinese counterpart Wang Yi on Wednesday. Wang reaffirmed China's position on remarks made by Japan's Prime Minister regarding Taiwan, urging France to support its stance on the matter. Barrot called for cooperation to tackle rising geopolitical tensions. The European Commission is rolling out new economic security tools to boost the bloc's resilience. Brussels unveiling economic security doctrine aimed at reducing over-reliance on Chinese critical metals and strengthening trade defenses, including anti-dumping and anti-subsidy measures. Taking a quick check on China's major rare earth stocks. Chengdu Galaxy down 0.3%. We got ZGXT off almost 2%, and Inuovo Techno down 0.1%. China's rare earth dominance has required Europe to pivot towards its own supply. CNBC's Sam Meredith visited one rare earth magnet facility in Estonia and has more in this report.
Europe is scrambling to secure access to critical raw materials. I'm here in Narva, Estonia, at a rare earth magnet factory on the Russian border that's working to reduce the bloc's dependence on China. Rare earth elements are essential for many modern technologies, from EVs and semiconductors to fighter jets. China is the undisputed supply chain leader, responsible for nearly 60% of the world's rare earth mining and more than 90% of the magnet manufacturing. And recent geopolitical tensions have thrown these once obscure raw materials to the top of the political agenda. This facility, run by Canadian group Neo Performance Materials, is the largest of its kind in Europe. It aims to create an alternative supply chain that doesn't run through Beijing. But just how much of a role can it play in Europe's push?
The market is enormous and it's growing at a tremendous rate, right? So globally, the market is 250,000 tons going to 600,000 tons, so more than doubling in 10 years. And more importantly, our concentration is 93% in a single jurisdiction. So when you put those two factors together, I think you'll find an enormously quick growing market. The European importation of these magnets is about 25,000 tons a year. So we'll start at 2, we'll go to 5, and then we'll do more thousands of tons after that. But I mean, a 2,000-ton facility is $150 to $200 million in revenue, depending on where rare earth prices are.
Neo's factory could be a huge opportunity, but it also shines an uncomfortable light on the scale of Europe's challenge.
There still remains quite a large gap between supply and demand that companies like Neo and others need to come forward and announce that next wave of capacity and the wave thereafter if Europe is really to move towards minimizing its reliance on China.
Rare earths and critical minerals have been caught in the US and China's trade crosshairs. European leaders and businesses have been reacting with the rapid deployment of factories like Neo. But building out a made-in-EU rare earth supply chain is a long and by no means easy road ahead. Sam Meredith, CNBC, Narva, Estonia.
We are watching the French President Emmanuel Macron in the capital of China, Beijing, as he has his meeting with President Xi Jinping. According to the schedule, there is a small-scale bilateral meeting between the two presidents, and then it'll be an expanded meeting. And within the next hour, also a signing ceremony and a joint statement is expected. So we are keeping track of all of the developments of this fourth state visit by Emmanuel Macron. And to talk more about this, Alfred Chipke, Director of NUS from East Asian Institute, joins us now. Alfred, very good morning, and it's nice to see you. Thank you very much for joining us today. In terms of deliverables, Emmanuel Macron bringing a delegation of 80, over 35 of those being executives. We have from Airbus, the likes of Danone, as well as EDF. In terms of expectations and deliverables, what are you looking for?
I think what we're seeing is now that basically the dust has settled as part of this global trade war. Each individual country is now trying to go back to do business, and Macron's visit is part of that. Like you said, with a large delegation of CEOs that are looking for deals, whether it's in aerospace, energy, or food, and the likelihood that there will be some progress and that Macron will come back with deliverables in that area, I think, is relatively high. He will, of course, also highlight probably the large trade imbalance that exists between Europe and China. So a part of that effort is to address these issues.
You mentioned the trade imbalance of the market access as well as the trade deficit. All of these are issues for that of France and China. Talk to us about the importance of the Chinese market for France.
Well, you know, if you look at French companies, for example, that are in China, there are some 2,000 companies that operate in China. China trades a lot with France, especially in particular sectors. So normalizing the relationship is very important for France. And of course, remember that you know, France is still facing, like other European countries, higher tariffs as it relates to the U.S. So China is an important factor in kind of rebalancing this.
As we look to the deliverables, economics is one side, but then there's also an expectation about the Ukraine war and to get an update there. As far as the Russia-Ukraine war is concerned and a push to curb support for the war, where do you think President Macron, where does he stand with getting anything accomplished or achievable in this aspect?
Macron will, of course, reiterate the European position that it wants China's support in this to ultimately get to a ceasefire or even a peace deal. I think from the Chinese side, I'm not sure that the position will be dramatically different. They will reiterate that they're looking for a political solution and, of course, that the sovereignty of each country is respected. So I don't think there will be a breakthrough, but it is, of course, important for Macron to express the European position because the war in Europe, basically, war in Ukraine overshadows everything else.
In a break from tradition, Ursula von der Leyen is not on this trip together with Emmanuel Macron. What is the significance of this? They've dubbed this as strictly bilateral, but what about the future of China-EU relations?
Well, I think what you're seeing now is that individual heads of countries are traveling to China. We had, Spain, the King of Spain was in China before. We have Macron now. We'll expect the UK Prime Minister to go early next year. And I think there is potentially also a visit envisaged by the German Chancellor. So in a certain kind of way, we're moving from just the European part back to the business relationships, and these are still driven by individual countries. And there is, of course, also competition among the European countries. So I think that's what we're seeing. It's kind of a normalization, at least on the business side, of the relationships that we might have had before.
You may remember back in 2023, Emmanuel Macron also had his own little hiccup, if you will, when it comes to the Taiwan question. And he got into a little bit of trouble with the United States, not necessarily China this time. But do you expect President Xi to get a reaffirmation from the French president about the One China policy?
I get the sense that China, in its discussion with counterparts across the world, will reiterate its position on Taiwan. I'm sure that will be part of what President Xi will reiterate. I don't think it's specific to Macron. I think that is something that China basically brings up in any major state visit.
We did have Japanese on their side. Of course, we're watching the juggling of Prime Minister Takaichi and how she's handling the situation post comments to lawmakers about a month ago, and she's dialed it back most recently. But Japan now has conveyed concerns over a possible invitation by President Emmanuel Macron to President Xi Jinping to attend G7 next year, which France will be the host. What do you make of this potential invitation to President Xi to join this grouping of meetings?
Well, I think it is an opportunity for the French president and Xi Jinping to do talk about the G7. France is going to be leading the presidency of the G7, and China will, of course, be an important part of the discussions of the G7. Whether or not China will participate, that remains to be seen, but it is an important item on the agenda.
I also want to get your take on some of the issues with regards of between China and France in particular, and Shein comes to mind because there was supposed to be a hearing of the suspension or the banning of Shein's online website in the French market for 3 years following the discovery of childlike sex dolls and weapons on their site. But that was only pushed back and delayed to December the 5th. I think it was to make way for President Macron's visit to China. How closely are you watching developments like this? The fact that Shein, this is a fast fashion retailer trying to get into the haute couture capital of the world.
Yeah, I don't know whether that would be raised at the level of President Xi himself. It might be raised as part of the bilateral discussion. I think if you look at the broader agenda that the two presidents have, I'm not sure that would be the top of the agenda.
Okay, when we talk about the agenda, there's a number of French executives that are accompanying the French president. I mentioned earlier Airbus, EDF, as well as Danone. Do you think that with China's self-sufficiency plans that they could be potentially buying more Airbus planes?
It is true that China is making a lot of progress, but I think for the future, China will continue to buy Airbuses. The demand is still relatively large, so I don't think it will have an impact anytime soon. I think as it relates to China itself and entering the market, it will also be selling, of course, to third countries, and of course that's where maybe Airbus and Boeing at the end of the day might be impacted. But I don't think in the short term there is any change.
So we're talking a lot about the deliverables for France. So what about on the Chinese side? What do you think that President Xi, and of course there's going to be meetings today with Premier Li Qiang, as well as the chairman of the National People's Congress, Zhao Leji. What does China want out of this?
Well, I think China wants to make sure that Europe does not just follow the lead by the Americans. It wants to have better relationships, and I think continuing to emphasize that China is open for business. It wants to invite investments. It is trying to improve part of the environment for foreign companies to come in. So just to establish a relationship of trust. Remember that I think over the last couple of years, the relationship between Europe and China has been a little bit more tense for a number of reasons. Of course, one of them being the war in Ukraine, but then of course also because of EVs. So there are many things where China wants to make sure that Europe does not increase barriers further, and maybe in certain areas is even be willing to make adjustment when it comes to tariff. So I think it is an important opportunity for both sides to establish channels of communication, of course this time at the level of presidency, but then hopefully later on also at lower levels, and especially now that France assumes the presidency of the G7, that's very important.
I also want to get your take on the European dynamics, and you can't really time these things, but we did have the signing by the European Commission of the Economic Security Doctrine and how to best respond to economic threats when it comes to the EU, rather to be proactive than reactive. What do you make of this latest security doctrine? And it comes as the two leaders are meeting in Beijing.
Well, in a certain kind of way, Europe is coming late to the party, right? Because the US has done that for a long, long time. China is doing it. So this is basically Europe just trying to come to a consensus on how to move forward. As we know, in the future, security will be more important than ever. Resilience might be more important at times than just economic efficiency. So I think it is just an effort by the European to have a framework that it could use to ensure its own security.
Alfred, thank you very much for joining us today. We're talking through the state visit by French President Emmanuel Macron to Beijing. Alfred Chipke there from NUS, the East Asian Institute. Russian President Vladimir Putin is expected to meet Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi in New Delhi later today. Talks are expected to focus on defense, energy, and trade ties. The visit marks Putin's first trip to India since the Ukraine war, as both sides seek to maintain trade relations despite Western sanctions. Now, India has emerged as the top purchaser of Russian crude. On the back of that, taking a look at oil in Asian trade, light crude at $59.24, Brent up 0.4% at $62.93. The China Connection taking a short break. We'll be right back.
Now you can stream endless sports and Netflix hits with Astro One. Get Astro One Sports and Netflix with a special deal via My Astro app today.
Scorebox Europe, your front row seat to the C-suite, just got a state-of-the-art upgrade.
With an expert lineup that you can trust. Let's see how the markets are shaping up. We'll be talking to Europe's leading business minds,
breaking down the headlines that move markets,
and giving you the edge as the European trading day kicks off.
a new look.
A new lineup. Same trusted insight.
Scorebox Europe.
Now live weekdays only on CNBC.
The C-suite executives reshaping how you view sports. We'll hear from NFL executives Christine Dorfler and Renee Anderson on the league's transformational plans for the next 5 years.
I think that we will be serving fans across the globe in a way that we never imagined.
Plus, Versant Sports President Matt Hong's game plan.
We have a wide variety of top-tier programming that crosses almost every geography and every demo that we could possibly want.
This is CNBC Sports on the Record.
We are on a central bank watch, and it's not just the FOMC. The Philippine Central Bank rate decision expected next week, with the BSP go ahead with rate cuts. CNBC Southeast Asia reporter JP Ong joins us now with more. JP.
Yeah, good morning, Emily. The expectations from economists heard by Reuters is that they will cut rates by 25 basis points, and this was supported by recent comments from Bangko Sentral Governor Eli Remolon, who was speaking to reporters. He was a little bit cagey with how he described it when he was asked as to whether or not there will be a rate cut by Thursday next week, and he said, in his words, most definitely, but not assured. Regardless, it means if they do go ahead with this, it will mean 200 basis points in rate cuts from the Bangko Sentral since June of last year. And this time around, he did say that this also might be necessitated because of worries about an uncertain economic downturn that is starting to hit Philippine growth. In fact, we did see that the Bangko Sentral also said they're expecting growth in the Philippines now to just be between 4 to 5% for this year, well below what's expected by economic planners for the most part out in Manila. And they actually cited also a loss of investor confidence that might be actually hitting the Philippines, which might necessitate support from the monetary side. The OECD also affirmed this actually, and also did say that they are also expecting that the Philippines, in terms of GDP, will only grow by 4.7% this year and 5.1% next year. And they explicitly said that the corruption scandal linked to the flood control projects is starting to undermine investor confidence and also casting a lot of economic uncertainty with regards to government and also consumer spending out in the Philippines. Thus, also perhaps just pushing the narrative that perhaps the Bangko Sentral might be called upon to provide a stimulus boost via that 25 basis point rate cut. But again, we'll have to wait until Thursday of next week, 3 p.m. Singapore Hong Kong time, to see if they indeed pull the trigger and introduce yet more easing of monetary policy to provide some stimulus for an economy that's needing even more support as the uncertainty from the corruption scandal continues, Emily.
JP, as we wait on the rate decision, how will this decision affect the currency?
That's a great question, actually, Emily, because we actually have seen that the peso might have already reacted to those comments from BSP Governor Eli Romolona. And for the first time, it's crossed the 59 to the US dollar threshold with its most conviction, actually, over the last couple of months. And this is probably at its record lows right now against the US dollar. As we know, based on classic economics, if you do introduce a policy rate cut, it tends to put pressure or weakening pressure on currencies like the Philippine peso. But again, also the overhang from that investor confidence that's already been stymied, also hitting the prospects of the Philippine peso, because demand for the peso will go down if investor confidence isn't restored. But also the corruption scandal also that's undermined economic confidence might also be reflected actually in the peso's own weakness, and thus if they are forced to make that rate cut, or if they feel that they have no choice but to make that rate cut next week, then the Philippine peso might be one of those few casualties they'll have to sacrifice with regards to providing economic stimulus. Currently at 59.11, and some of the more pessimistic currency analysts actually covering the local currency in Manila do think that there is still a chance even that the peso could even test 60 in the coming months if uncertainty brought about by these myriad of factors isn't resolved sooner rather than later, Emily.
JP, thank you very much for that. We are waiting on the Philippine Central Bank rate decision next week. Let's bring you the latest on the deadly fire in Hong Kong in Tai Po. The death toll now has hit 159 with an infant among the dead. We are looking at those affected, impacted between 0, or I should say a baby, and up to 97 years old. They comprise 91 females and 49 males. Police say 31 people still remain missing. Hong Kong authorities have ordered that scaffolding mesh installed at all residential buildings under renovation must be taken down. So this is after the government authorities found that there were false safety certificates found at 2 building sites, and really it was this substandard mesh material that was draped over the bamboo scaffolding that caused the fire to spread so quickly and through 7 out of 8 towers at Wang Fuk Court. So authorities ordering the scaffolding net to be removed across the territory. There's about 300 buildings that are currently under renovation, and all of this scaffolding needs to be removed within the next 3 days. The scaffolding netting will be put back on, but it will be on-site testing to ensure that they meet up to standards and that everything is safe before it is to be installed. Now, as far as arrests are concerned, 6 more people are responsible for the fire alarm system. That brings to 21 individuals that have been arrested on suspicion of manslaughter as a probe into the cause of the fire continues. And also the anti-corruption body here in Hong Kong, the ICAC, is also investigating possible graft. So that is the latest from the Tai Po fire. And we do know that the residents of the unaffected tower, so this would be tower number 8, yesterday and today allowed to return to their homes. They're each given 90 minutes to remove their belongings or just to take what they need. Of course, that entire Wang Fuk Court is sealed off as the rescue efforts and the investigation still continue following the Tai Po tragedy. Now, we want to take one last look at the Greater China markets. A bit mixed. We got the Hang Seng Index pulling ahead at 0.4%. In Shenzhen, higher by 0.3%. The Shanghai market traded with a slight negative bias at 38.71. This as we are continuing to watch the state visit by Emmanuel Macron, the French president, to China in Beijing. In fact, currently the 2 gentlemen are in a bilateral meeting that has been closed to the media. They're also going to be having an expanded meeting, and then at 11:30, in about 35 minutes from now, a signing ceremony and joint statement is expected to take place. Apart from those meetings, we're also expecting the gentlemen, the French and the Chinese business meeting to take place, a Franco-Chinese conference, if you will. Emmanuel Macron bringing a delegation of 80 strong with him on this 4th visit to Beijing. So we will have continuing coverage coming to you from Beijing. On that note, that'll do it for the China Connection. I'm Emily Tan here. Inside India is coming up next.